Hello and welcome to a discussion on factoring trinomials of the form ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, so to add on what we learned earlier, this time we're going to have a coefficient in front of the x value that is squared. So there will be something besides a 1 in for a, and this is how we're going to factor. There are a couple of different approaches. I'm going to talk about the approach I like to use. Your instructor may use a different approach. Okay, so first let's consider something that we were used to working with before, where we have to use the FOIL method to simplify. So as you can see, there is a coefficient right here in front of x that is greater than 1, it is a 2. So that means we multiply across using the FOIL method, we're going to have something in for a that is not 1. That 2 dictates that fact. So let's go ahead and use the FOIL method. We have the quantity 2x plus 2 times x plus 3. If we use the FOIL method, we're going to take the 2x, multiply it times the x in the second set of parentheses for the f. For the first, then we're going to take the x squared in the first set and multiply it by the 3 in the second set of parentheses. For the O, for the I, we'll move to the 2 in the first set of parentheses, multiply it by the x. And then finally for the L term of FOIL, we'll take the 2 and multiply it by the 3 in the set of parentheses that comes second. So let's go through and simplify what we have. We have 2x times x plus 2x times 3. Then we have plus 2 times x. Then we have a plus 2 times the 3. We'll go through and simplify. 2x times x is 2x squared. 2x times 3 is a positive 6x. Over here, 2x times x is just 2x. And then finally, when we multiply 2 times 3, we get a positive 6. Go through and simplify this middle term here. We have 2x squared plus, we combine 6x plus 2x, we have 8x, and then just add the 6. Alrighty, so we just look at our process. We see that a has the coefficient of 2 in for x, and then the rest of the pattern follows. Alrighty, so let's actually look at some examples, but first let's have a sign patterns when factoring trinomials note. Okay, so if we read this, a positive constant in a trinomial tells us to look for two numbers with the same sign. A, the sign of the coefficient of the middle term tells us whether the signs are both positive or both negative. I, if positive, then both signs are positive. 2, if negative, then both signs are negative. Then of course number 2, a negative constant in a trinomial tells us the signs of the larger two numbers. The sign of the coefficient in the middle term tells us the sign of the larger of the two numbers. 1, if positive, then the larger number is also positive. 2, if negative, then the larger number is also negative. And this kind of follows the procedure we were going with before when we had just a coefficient of 1 in for the x squared term. Right, so let's talk about the procedure to go through. So for this procedure for factoring ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is something greater than 1. Alrighty, so on the left side we'll actually work out the problem, and on the right side of the page are actually the steps we'll follow. So what I like to do is first identify in this set of trinomial what a, b, and c are. Well, a will be equal to 2. It's the number that's always associated with x squared. B will be the number that is associated with only a regular x with a exponent of 1 or just a plain x. So b is equal to 3, and c is just a regular number that has no exponent or no variable or exponent attached to it, so it is just the regular 1 right there. Now it's important to note that some polynomials may have two terms, and it is important to note what a, b, and c are. So for step 2, we want to multiply a and c. So a times c, in this case 2 times 1 we get 2. Okay, so then describe the numbers that will multiply to give you A and C multiplied together that add to give you B. So let me zoom out and focus. Okay, so we see that B is equal to 3, and also we just multiplied these together, and since 2 is prime, 1 and 2 are the only things that will come together to give you 3. So the numbers that add together to give you B that multiply to give you A and C are just 2 and 1. Okay, so what we need to do now is rewrite the original trinomial, replacing the B term, place those numbers with variables attached in the place of B in the original function, or the original trinomial. So I'm just placing the A and C term. All I'm going to do, since these are all positive, we know that the 2 and the 1 that we selected will also be positive. So let's write those in place, just like that. All we did was take the numbers that multiplied together with A and C that added to give us B, which in this case was 3. So we're just rewriting the middle term. So now that we've done that, step 5 is factor function by splitting into 2 pieces that will look something like this. And as we were working the last piece of factoring, I believe we should be able to do this. So what we want to do is to set up 2 sets of parentheses and then factor. In this first set here, I believe you'll see that we can factor out a 2x on both sides of this term. So we pull out a 2x. What we're going to be left with here, when we divide this term by 2x, we're just left with x. And over here, we're going to be left with a positive 1, or just plus 1. And over here, it looks like what we can factor out is just a plain 1. And when we do that, we're going to be left with just x plus 1. And if we simplify using those rules that we learned before, we can take the terms out in front of these parentheses and make it its own term of x plus 1, or 2x plus 1, excuse me, times x plus 1. And that is how you would factor the trinomial right here, 2x squared plus 3x plus 1, to make it into the 2 terms of 2x plus 1 times the quantity x plus 1. Alrighty, so let's look at some other examples using our procedure. So examples, the instructions are just to factor. So what we want to do first, identify A, B, and C. In this case, A will be 7 because it is with the x squared. B will be the negative 20 because it's just with the regular x. And C will be 12 because it's just a regular number with nothing attached to it. I'm going to put commas after these to separate the terms. Okay, so next step was to multiply A times C, so we'll have 7 times 12, and we get 84. And as you can see over here on the right, we have the things that multiply together to give us 84. So our goal is to say what numbers will multiply together to give you 84 from this list that when you combine them will give you a negative 20. And remember our rules from before that both of these will have to be negative, because the positive sign for C tells us to use both terms as the sign of B. So I believe if you look for this, if we make all of these negative, only one set will work, and that will be the term negative 6 minus 14, because if you multiply these together you get a positive 84, but if you add them together you get a negative 20. So just use that procedure to rewrite the original trinomial, replacing B term with a negative 6x, don't forget the variable, minus a 14x. And then we should be able to use our rules of factoring to break these apart. Okay, and when we do that, I believe you'll see that from here we're only going to be able to factor out an x. So really we're going to be left with a 7x minus 6, and I really want to keep the negative factored in there. So I'm going to write a negative, and what's the number that both 14 and 12 will go into? I believe that will be 2. So if we factor out a 2, we say negative 14x divided by positive 2, we're going to have a positive 7x. If we say 12 divided by negative 2, we're going to have a negative 6. So, and as our terms match, we can bring these together as x minus 2, because they're the terms out in front of the parentheses, multiply times the term 7x minus 6. Okay, now if we look at number 2, I believe you'll see that we can multiply, or first identify what each term is. So a is associated with x squared, or just 2. B is associated with just a plain x, so that's a 4. And C has no variable attached to it, so it will be 2. Our next rule is to then multiply A and C, so we have 2 times 2, or 4. And we can go through and list all the things that multiply to give us 4, 1 and 4, 2 and 2. So now we have to ask what signs do we want to use. Well, this is positive and this is positive, so it means both of these will be, all of these possibilities will be positive. So what we need to do is select the terms that add together to give us 4 and multiply to give us 4. So from this list, when we're adding, what will give us 4 will be this right here, 2 and 2. So let's take the 2 and 2, attach x's to them, and replace it in the b term. So let's write 2x squared plus, we'll take 2x from here, and then put a 2 here, attaching an x to it, and then just write the final c term, or plus 2. Let's go through and factor our two terms. From this set, I believe you will see that we can factor out a 2x. I'm going to do that on this side. We're factoring, I believe we're just going to be left with an x and plus 1. Over here, something that both terms will go into, I believe you'll see that it's just a 2. And what can we factor out? We can factor out x plus 1. If you notice, our terms match. They're saying the common term, so we can just take 2x plus 2 in parentheses times x plus 1. And the 2x plus 2 just came from the terms out in front of the parentheses. And for this final example, I believe you can look at this and see that we can actually factor out something before actually having to go to where we have to multiply A and C and go through that. So what can we do? First of all, I'd say, is there a number we can factor out? And there is. We can factor out a 15, because 15 will go into this term, and this term. And we look at that, and then we need to say what variable, if any, can we factor out. And each has an x, so we can do that. And now we're going to take the lowest exponent. So we took the x because it is the least exponent there. Now let's go through and just factor out. I believe you'll see that when we factor this term, we're just saying this term divided by what we're factoring out, and we're just going to be left with an x squared. On this side, I believe you'll see we're going to get a negative 3x, and finally, I believe you'll see we're going to get a negative 4. And that's just a simple x squared minus bx plus c term, so we can easily factor this out. So I'm going to write my 15x squared going to set up my two sets of parentheses just as we did before. We started having a coefficient in front of x. We'll write our x, and since the c term is negative, that means one term will be positive and one term will be negative. So now we have to say, what are the factors of 4? Where one will be positive, one will be negative, and since the b term is negative, that means the larger number will be negative. So what number that multiplies to give us 4, actually a negative 4 in this case, that when added together gives you a negative 3, and if you look, the 1 and the negative 4 works. So place the positive 1 in with the plus, the negative 4 in with the minus. So just write a 4 in there. And that is the answer for that type of trinomial.